Once upon a time, in the fierce heat of West Africa, when the earth was dry and red, and the wind carried both dust and warning, there was a queen whose name would survive the footsteps of empire. Her name was Sarraounia. She ruled in Lugu, among the Azna people, and she was not like the rulers foreign invaders expected to find. She was not fragile, she was not ornamental. She was not a woman who waited behind walls while others decided the fate of her people. Sarraounia was a queen, yes, but she was also something more. She was a spiritual leader, a guardian, a woman whose authority came not only from power, but from presence. Her people looked to her for strength. Her enemies looked at her with suspicion. There was something about her they could not easily explain, and perhaps that was what unsettled them most. At that time, the horizon was darkening. Across Africa, colonial armies were moving deeper into lands that were not theirs. They came with rifles, uniforms, maps, and the belief that any people they met could be subdued. They marched as though history itself had chosen them. Villages were forced into submission. Rulers were expected to bow. Communities that resisted were met with brutality. And one of the most feared of these invading forces was moving through the region. It was the French Chanoine expedition, a mission remembered not for mercy, but for terror. News of its coming spread ahead of it like smoke before fire. People heard of destruction, of cruelty, of settlements torn apart, of men who did not come to speak but to seize. So when word reached Lugu that the invaders were drawing near, the air changed. The ordinary rhythm of life gave way to unease. Conversations became quieter. Faces grew more serious. People listened more closely to the wind, as though it might carry the truth of how near danger really was. And in the middle of that rising fear stood Sarraounia. She understood what was approaching. This was not a passing conflict. It was not a dispute between neighbors. It was invasion. It was the arrival of a force that did not merely want land, but obedience. A force that wanted to crush the spirit of a people along with their resistance. Sarraounia did not answer that threat with surrender. She began to prepare. Perhaps at night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, she thought of what would be lost if Lugu fell without a fight. The land of her people, their ways, their dignity, their memory, their future. Perhaps she knew that some battles are fought not because victory is certain, but because refusal is necessary. Her people gathered around that resolve. They did not have the machinery of empire. They did not have the weapons of a European expedition. But they had something empire often failed to understand. They had attachment to home. They had pride. They had memory. And above all, they had a queen who would not abandon them. When the invaders finally came toward Lugu, they likely expected another frightened community, another easy conquest, another name to add to their path of domination. Instead, they found Sarraounia. She did not kneel before them. She did not stretch out her hands and plead for mercy. She stood in defense of her people, and in that stance there was something larger than one woman, larger than one settlement, larger even than one battle. There was a whole people saying no. What followed became legend. The clash at Lugu was not simply a military confrontation. It was a meeting between two worlds. On one side stood the force of colonial conquest, armed with violence and certainty. On the other stood a queen rooted in land, spirit, and duty, defending what could not be replaced once lost. One can imagine the tension of that hour. The dust rising beneath hurried feet, the noise of movement, the fear beating in the chest, the knowledge that history had arrived without mercy. And somewhere in that terrible moment, Sarraounia remained what her people needed her to be: steady, unbroken, present. She fought not as a symbol carved after the fact by memory, but as a living leader in a real and dangerous hour. That is what makes her story burn so brightly even now. She was not created by legend alone. Legend grew because she first chose courage. And when people later spoke of her, they spoke not only of battle, but of power of another kind. They remembered her spiritual authority. They remembered the force of her presence. They remembered that she was more than a political figure. She carried the weight of sacred leadership, and that gave her resistance a depth the invaders could neither measure nor fully understand. Empires often write themselves as unstoppable. They tell history as though conquest happened naturally, as though those who were invaded simply disappeared before superior force. But the story of Sarraounia refuses that lie. It reminds us that invasion was resisted. It reminds us that African history is not only a story of what was done to people, but also of what people did in return, how they defended, how they endured, how they stood. And Sarraounia stood. Even if empire pushed onward, even if colonial violence continued across the region, something important had already been secured. Memory, meaning, moral victory. The knowledge that Lugu did not open its arms to conquest in silence. The knowledge that a queen rose in defense of her people and made the invader confront resistance. That is why her name did not vanish. Long after the expedition moved on, long after reports were written and battlefields emptied, Sarraounia remained alive in memory. She became more than a ruler of one place. She became a figure of resistance. A woman whose defiance challenged not only colonial power, but every assumption that leadership in war belonged to men alone. There is something deeply moving in that image. A queen beneath an African sky, a people under threat, a moment of decision, and a woman who chooses not safety, but duty. Perhaps that is why her story still speaks so powerfully today. Because every age knows its invaders. Not always armies, not always men with rifles, but forces that seek to dominate, erase, humiliate, or take what does not belong to them. And every age needs the memory of those who stood firm when surrender would have been easier. Sarraounia is one of those memories. She is remembered not because history was gentle with her, but because she answered violence with courage. Because she defended more than territory. She defended identity. She defended dignity. She defended the right of her people to remain fully themselves in the face of conquest. So when we say her name, we do not speak only of the past. We speak of a queen who would not bow, a spiritual leader who would not yield, a woman who faced empire and did not disappear before it. And once upon a time, when invasion came marching toward the land of the Azna, it did not find emptiness. It did not find surrender. It found Sarraounia. The end.